Hello, I'm Jamie Swan. I'm an elite examiner for A-Level Philosophy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about assessment principles in A-Level Philosophy papers. Hopefully you'll have already seen our What Makes Good Assessment videos about the principles of assessment, which cover concepts such as validity and reliability and what those terms mean. In this video, I'm going to talk about how those principles apply in philosophy. Throughout the session, we're going to look at the 4 question tariffs and consider how they relate to the 2 assessment objectives, how they differ from and build on each other, the kinds of questions asked to each tariff, the language or command words used within each question tariff and the scope of the questions, that is, how they relate to specification content. There are just 2 assessment objectives in philosophy. The first is to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the core concepts and methods of philosophy, including through the use of philosophical analysis. The second assessment objective is to analyse and evaluate philosophical arguments to form reasoned judgments. Both of these assessment objectives were set by Ofqual and AQA have to base their assessment around these. As can be seen on the screen, the first assessment objective is reflected in the complete range of questions as the 3, 5 and 12 mark questions are focused on assessing knowledge and understanding. The second assessment objective is only assessed in the 25 mark essay question, as this is predominantly focused on assessing analysis and evaluation skills. This means that in each paper, there are 60 marks available for AO1 and 40 marks for AO2. Therefore, AQA fulfil the Ofqual stipulated 60-40 weighting between the 2 assessment objectives. As the assessment objectives dictate that students need to show knowledge and understanding within AO1, as well as analysis and evaluation in AO2, questions need to facilitate these skills, but only in relation to the specification content. It's imperative to understand that in philosophy, the specification content is always the starting point for a question writer, as questions must be directly related to what is listed on the specification. If we take this section of the specification from the epistemology unit, a 3-mark question, such as state the claim made by the tripartite view, would be legitimate as this is directly listed on the specification. However, what is significant here is what is not included on the specification. A question such as explain the strength of the tripartite view could not be asked because there is no reference to students being required to know the strengths of the tripartite view. We will discuss individual question structure and stems later in this presentation. However, first it's good to look at the paper holistically. Both philosophy papers, so that's paper 1 focusing on epistemology and moral philosophy, and paper 2 focusing on the metaphysics of God and the metaphysics of mind, follow an identical structure, whereby the number of questions and marks progress in an identical manner. Each paper begins with a 3-mark question, followed by the 2 5-mark questions, then the 12-marker, and finally the 25-mark essay question. As the tariff increases, either the level of detail required to successfully answer the question will be greater, or the amount of the specification they relate to will increase. This culminates in all skills being deployed in the 25-mark essay question. The increase in demand is mirrored by the increased space available to respond to different question types in the answer booklet. For example, if we consider a 3-mark question to be outline AA's verification principle, how could we adapt this to be a 5-mark question which includes an increased demand for detail? You may wish to pause the video to consider how you would do this. One way this could be achieved is shown on screen here, where rather than just being asked to outline AA's verification principle, students are asked to explain how AA's verification principle challenges the status of religious language. Let's now consider the jump from a 3-mark question to a 12-mark question. On screen is a question you may recognise from the sample assessment materials available on the AQA website. This 3-mark question asks, what is philosophical skepticism? How can this question be developed into a 12-mark question, requiring a higher demand of detail and also increasing the range of specification it relates to? You may wish to pause the video whilst you consider your response. Here we can see one where you may have progressed the question from a 3-mark one to a 12-mark one. This question from 2020 shows a shift from what is philosophical skepticism to explain philosophical skepticism, and through reference to reliabilism requires students to cover a greater range of specification content. The specification includes the following phrases: and responses to these issues, and issues with these responses, and issues arising from these responses. Such phrases will not be included in questions because this makes mark schemes very difficult to write, since there is such a wide variety of material that could be taught here. These responses and issues parts of the specification are covered within 25-mark essay answers, where they can be used to add layers or robustness to a debate. For example, the following questions are impossible. Explain a response to the time lag argument for 5 marks, or explain the argument that idealism leads to solipsism and one way of responding to this for 12 marks. As we go through each question tariff, we will be considering how the skills drawn from the levels of response mark schemes are required and build upon each other. Now, let's move on to look at the 4 different question types. 3-mark questions can cover the meaning of a term, such as what is a philosophical zombie, or define qualia. They can ask for similarities or differences between terms or theories, such as what is the difference between direct realism and indirect realism, as seen in 2023. They can ask for the meaning of specific terms used by specific philosophers, such as what does Kant mean by hypothetical imperative, or, as in 2022, state the definitions of God used by A. Anselm and B. Descartes in their ontological arguments. Finally, 3-mark questions can ask for the meaning of a claim, such as in 2021, what does it mean to say that a person's religious claim is unfalsifiable? On the screen are 6 questions representing potential 3-mark questions. Please read through each question and consider whether each fulfills the necessary criterion to be a legitimate question. Consider both how they are phrased, what they are asking, and whether they are related to specification content. For any which you believe to be illegitimate questions, please consider why and whether it would be possible to tweak these so that they became valid. The questions will remain visible on the screen for 90 seconds. If you need further time or are discussing this as a department, then please pause the video to give extra time. The first question is not representative of what a potential question may look like, as it is not focused on student knowledge of A, the meaning of terms, or B, claims or principles put forward by theories. We won't ask for philosophers' names in these questions. This question directly relates to the deontological ethics part of the spec and fits with common 3-mark question language. This third question would not be valid as we do not ask for explanations in 3-mark questions. As this directly relates to the meta-ethics part of the spec and fits with the language and phrasing commonly used in 3-mark questions, it is valid. This would be an illegitimate question, as testing a student's memory regarding the names of philosophers or theories does not sufficiently test their ability to demonstrate precise understanding of the philosophy of those people or theories. This final example would also be incorrect, as it is not focused on a student's knowledge of either the meaning of terms or the claims or principles put forward by theories. We will not ask students about arguments or reasons in 3-mark questions. It is also not really possible to state an argument. It can instead be outlined or explained. However, this is more indicative of 5-mark questions. 5-mark questions focus upon explaining theories, arguments, objections, issues or responses, similarities and differences, distinctions, and ethical theory applied to issues. This first example is relatively simple, and it simply asks to explain has prescriptivism. The command word explain is a clear increase in demand from the command words used in 3-mark questions. The second question is an example of how students can be asked to explain arguments, in this case, Berkeley's master argument. Students can be asked to explain philosophers' objections, issues, or responses to arguments, provided they are from within the specification. In this case, the specification directly states that students should address issues that may arise for the cosmological arguments, including the cosmological argument commits the fallacy of composition, and Russell's name is placed in brackets after this. Similarities and differences can be requested, such as this question from 2017 asking students to explain how limited materialism differs from mind-brain type identity theory. In a similar vein, distinctions can be requested, such as Kant's distinction between acting in accordance with duty and acting out of duty. Although there are no examples of 5-mark questions requesting an ethical theory be applied to an issue, there is no reason a question like this couldn't be asked. Like with the 3-mark questions, on screen are questions representing potential 5-mark questions. Please read through each question and consider whether each fulfills the necessary criterion to be a legitimate question. For any which you believe to be illegitimate questions, please consider why and whether it would be possible to tweak these so that they became valid. The questions will remain visible on the screen for 90 seconds. If you need further time or are discussing this as a department, then please pause the video to give extra time. This first question is perfectly legitimate in terms of the wording and relevance to the specification. Number 2 is unclear. It could be answered without explanation. For example, it is an argument that originated with Plato, so this is not legitimate. This third example has command words that we won't use. Students can use illustration as a way of explaining if they wish, but it will never be asked for. Question number 4 uses the command word give, which we do not use. Also, this question is unfair, as examples of qualia are not included in the specification. The 5th question fulfills all criterion for a 5-mark question, so is entirely legitimate. Now let's progress to 12-mark questions. There is a greater variety of types of 12-mark question, but a common factor is that they all require integration between the parts of the answer. One type of 12-mark question is where question setters ask for a theory or argument to be explained and then ask students to follow this up with an additional supporting or opposing argument or theory. Although we don't have yet an example of a question of this ilk from the current specification, on screen is an example from a previous specification to highlight what a similarities and differences question could look like. Another style of question which could be asked as a 12-mark question is where multiple related theories are bunched together. Again, I've used an example from a previous specification to highlight what a question of this manner could look like. An as yet unasked version of a 12-mark question could be asking students to explain a theory or argument which has too much content for a 5-mark question. Finally, students can be asked to explain how a normative ethical theory can be applied to an issue, such as the example on screen from 2023. If you are watching within your department or even alone, you may wish to pause the video and try to create a question of each type using the specification content for Aristotelian virtue ethics, plus for the comparison and application questions, other parts of the specification. Now, on to the 25-mark questions. One way of thinking about the 25-mark questions is that they are a natural development from explaining how one theory or argument might support or oppose another, as is required in one of the 12-mark question types. On screen, you can see a simple structure for the response to a 12-mark question asked in 2021. 25-mark questions will involve the same kind of integration between the parts, but now it will be discussed with the second assessment objective in mind, therefore the author's intent will be clear, rather than the neutral presentation of a 12-mark answer. The candidate might also decide to continue the debate further in their response. All the key skills developed in the other types of questions are needed in 25-mark questions. However, in addition is the 4th key skill that a clear and coherent argument or intent is visible throughout, robustly defended with consideration of the weight of arguments. In 25-mark questions, the student is expressing a viewpoint. 25-mark questions are fairly formulaic and can be divided into 2 main categories: theory or claim and argument. On screen are examples of each. These questions reflect the way in which the specification is written. In creating 25-mark questions, it is important that the question allows students to fully meet the criteria in the levels of response mark bands. Students can only give a robust defence using multiple arguments which are weighted where relevant if there are sufficient relevant specification arguments, including objections, issues, problems, and/or responses. It would be wrong to dictate a specific rule here as to areas of the specification where this is deemed possible or too difficult, but we can give some examples. Let's consider the part of the specification considering the concept and nature of God. All 3 questions on screen would not be consistent with the assessment rubric. Pause the video and consider why each would not be classified as legitimate. For this first question, there is only one relevant argument within the specification, the argument in the question itself. This would not facilitate enough content for students to achieve the top-level band, so would not be sufficiently valid. Here, there are no obvious or directly relevant specification arguments, so it would be an unfair question to ask. In this third example, there is only one relevant specification argument, the paradox of the stone. It could perhaps be answered including the problem of evil and/or human free will in addition, but it would not be fair to expect this approach from all students. Although the 3 previous examples didn't hit the mark required for a 25-mark question, this area of the specification was successfully examined in a 25-mark question in 2020 when students were asked, is the concept of God incoherent? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this presentation informative and useful. If you have any questions or feedback, then please do email philosophy@aqa.org.uk.